Hey everybody, welcome to Music Biz Live. I'm Portia Sabin, the president of the Music Business Association. Today we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of Elektra Records. Very exciting. My guest today started Elektra Records in his dorm room in 1950. Some of the artists signed to the label in the first couple of decades include Judy Collins, Phil Oakes, The Doors, The Stooges, and the MC5. Over the course of his career, he started other labels like Nonesuch and Cordless. He created WEA and ADA, and he's been involved in product planning for Atari and been a director at Pioneer Electronics as they developed the compact disc, as well as being involved in the company that developed the Steadicam. This is a person who has had a truly astonishing career. I'm so excited to welcome my guest and our live Music Biz Live person of the moment, Mr. Jac Holzman. Please help me welcome Jac.
Okay, everything is operating now. You got me?
I gotcha. Hi, Jac. How are you?
Yeah, can I get you up on the screen now? That's better. That's better.
Terrific.
I lose the family feeling if you're not there occasionally.
No, it doesn't
anyway,
work.
I'm ready to answer questions.
Well, thanks so much for being here. This is really a great honor for us to be able to talk to you today.
The honor is merely a delight for me.
Well, I want to get into this aspect. I mean, I think we're going to range all over the place today, which is great. I think everyone who's attending wants to hear everything that you have to say. But one of the things that really stands out for me about your career is that you have been a pioneer in both the physical and the digital spaces in the music industry. And, you know, when I came into the industry, when I started running a record label, it was still a physical marketplace. And now it has transitioned to becoming very much a digital marketplace. So I really wanted to ask you sort of, what's your feeling about that tension that exists in our industry between the physical and the digital? What do you think of the place that we're at now, largely a digital marketplace, but with some strong physical components, especially vinyl?
Well, I think to get a sense of that, let's go back in history to the very beginning. Morse code, dots and dashes, binary. You go into, I have notes here, you go into the player piano. There's a hole or there's not a hole. So this started we were able to communicate complex things with dot. Holzman, dit, da, 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 dit, da, dit, da, dit, da, 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 dit. That's Holzman. So this is something I think that's been highly ignored, but our ability to communicate complex things with a dot and a dash is very, very interesting. And not that it was consciously foretold that this was going to lead to something, which it did 70 years later. But it was a start, the player piano in the home. And then after that you had, which was a binary system. And after that you went into shellac discs. You had car radios in the 1930s. These are great progressions. First car radio cost $130 back in 1935 to get put in your car. In 1920, 78 RPM discs. In 1930s, the car radios, which I expect. In 1948, the event that changed everything, which was the creation of the LP by Dr. Peter Goldmark and his people at Columbia Labs. There we had it all. We had a record that was easy to carry. It was not like, if you had a classical album, you had 5 very heavy shellac records, and if you dropped one, you waited a month to get a replacement. And you needed someone else to carry it around for you. But here you suddenly had this little easy thing which you could pop under your arm. That's what got me excited. I recognized that the LP and its timing would change everything, and that the major labels would do what the major labels always did: classics, pop, stuff like that. But if I could start a label that ignored them, I would do what I wanted to do, the music which I love, which was Baroque music, and it was folk music. I couldn't afford Baroque music, but I could afford an artist sitting in front of a microphone, and that's how Elektra started. That was a gigantic opportunity, and hundreds of labels were started over the first 4 to 5 years, and only Atlantic and Elektra survive today as labels. But it was, the LP led to many different improvements over time. Like about 9 years later, we had the stereo LP, thanks to Westinghouse, who developed the first CD cutting head. The first DVD cutting head. I'm wrong. The first vinyl cutting head that would handle stereo. So it's been, after that, you had the Neumann microphones, which were better. You had tape recorders, which we could record on. And we were doing this stuff very, very simply. If you had access to a Neumann tape recorder, to a Neumann mic and a solid tape recorder, there are only two. Ampex was by far the most favorable. You could have a record company. And that's how we started. And the thing was, we'd find artists we'd like, we'd put them in front of a microphone, and we'd pray they'd sell a few records. But speaking strictly from the Elektra standpoint, which is what I know best, no, we were putting out 5 or 6 or 7 records a year, and we were kind of holding our own. But it didn't happen big for us until folk music was washed out. When folk music went on television and people were clapping their hands to the music, I knew it was a dead duck. And I knew that what was going to come forward, which were people writing their own songs in the present moment, was going to change. But it was going to take time to find those people. And that's when I decided that's when you have to be original. What do you do when you've got nothing to record? And I walked into my house one day and I heard a car crash on the stereo. And I thought about it and it hit me. Nobody has done a sound effects series that takes into account all of the sound effects that would normally be used by radio stations and movie things and stuff like that. People who have shows and theater. I would do that. And we put about $100,000 into the doing of that, and it took us about a year. But we made $1,500,000 the first year because nobody else had it, and we had done it right. You always have to think about what's missing. What do I need to put down? How do in a disc of 30 different sound effects on one side, how do you locate one? Well, we had a thing that went right over the spindle and pointed right to the groove, leading into the sound effect. And we had to be very careful when we remastered, and there was a lot of remastering to get the spiral in exactly the right place. But it's the ingenuity that comes once you decide to do it. Ideas flood in. You've opened the door to yourself, and this stuff happens. And that was one of the great lessons of my life, was if I put my heart in it and really thought it through, I could make it work. And None Such was 4 years later was the cousin of what we had learned how to do before.
So I'm interested, this organization, Music Biz, started out as NARM. which was the National Association of Retail Merchandisers. And this association, I believe, started in 1957. And I didn't know the history of how people brought records to the marketplace before the 1960s. And really, there weren't record stores. It was a totally different, so
Yeah.
people were selling records in drugstores and pharmacies. And so I'm interested, when you started Elektra, how did you guys bring your records to the marketplace? Did you go directly to radio stations or how?
Well, no radios. I started with folk music, and I was in folk music for years. There weren't the radio stations playing folk music except public broadcasting stations, usually at 5 o'clock on Sunday morning. So you didn't know what was going to happen. What we did, though, was college radio. I hired somebody, put him in a Volkswagen, loaded him with records, and sent them out to college radio stations. That was measurable in the increase in sales we had. You've always got to be thinking about something new, paying attention, and paying no attention to what the large labels are doing.
That's words for the ages, right?
When I told my father, who didn't think much of me anyway, that I was going to start a record company and I needed $500, and I had some bar mitzvah money, and a friend of mine had some money, and we pooled it. He decided that it wasn't going to work and left about 6 months later. I bought him out for $1,000. He had a 50% interest, but that was his choice. My choice was to stick with it. And he had me see if my dad was a doctor, and he had a patient who was an executive at Decca Records. And he asked that patient to sit down and talk sense to me. And I sat down with it, and he explained to me why it was going to be impossible for us to survive because we didn't have what they had. And I said, I don't want what you have. I will make what I need, and I will watch the markets and see how they develop, and I'll be there. You're not any competition to me. And that's exactly what happened. We thought, we put ourselves in the position of the client, who was the listener. And for instance, when we would produce an LP, I don't have one of them with me. I wonder what that's from. You getting that feedback sign? I'm just the one that's getting it, probably closeness to the microphone. We would have not just an album, but we would have all the lyrics. It would be in a protective sleeve, which didn't exist back in those days. If it was a foreign language, it would have the lyrics in the foreign language in a transliteration, which is what the language sounded, make it sound like if you had it done phonetically, and then the English translation. But by doing these things and being careful about it, we were able to create a small universe. But everything we did, we invented the sampler record. I'm sitting in a theater one night, and I'm looking at the screen, and they're next week. What happened was, I said to myself, why aren't we using our medium to market our medium? What's it going to take? And I slept on it and decided to create the sampler record, which we created, and we would sell it for $2. And it had 14 titles on it, and 14 new records were introduced every time. You just make it up as you go along and pretend you're right. My favorite motto, pretend you're right and go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, a self-inflicted motto.
Yes. But I love it that you saw niches, you saw holes in the marketplace and saw them as opportunities.
They were more than niches. I think that they were widescreen opportunities, but I just put myself on the opposite side, and what do I have to do to make it work? And it worked. So that was great fun succeeding. The greatest fun was staying alive. When we took in over $1 million on the sound effects in 1 year, all of our debt was paid off. We had our distributors financed us. I'm sorry, our manufacturers financed us. By that, I mean the people who would actually fabricate the covers and press the records. And I was deathly afraid because our bills were running up to $90,000 in 1954 and 55 terms is a lot of money. But what we did was we paid them something every 2 weeks, a little bit more, praying for a break. And Theodore Bickel's Songs of a Russian Gypsy and Jewish folk songs were records that sold about 40,000 each. We got the $90,000 back. We paid them off. We kept them. They breathe. Say, my God, we really got paid. But it was that kind of make it up as you go along, but keep your promises.
So you started a couple other record labels along the way, amongst many other things that you've done. When you would start a new label like None Such, for example, was that because you had a different vision that was just something that you thought that your current label couldn't totally cover because it was a different genre or something?
When I was at St. John's College, a college to which the only other famous member was Ahmet Ertegun, the downtown Annapolis, which is where St. John's College was located, electronics store, they sold televisions, radio stuff, had records, and they would have maybe Westminster records. And then there were two of them that and which one do I buy? I've only got $5. I can't get two records. And that stayed with me. I was waiting for a friend to join me one night in a delicatessen that had this brown butcher paper as tablecloths. And I was across the street from Carnegie Hall. And I looked across the street and there was a Baroque concert that evening. And it hit me. I couldn't afford. Can I produce records that are high quality at the price of a quality paperback book? Which was half of $5, which was $2.50 back in those days, 1964, and everybody said I was crazy. But over the years, I've done a lot of strange things. One is I subscribed to a number of overseas magazines, and I would cut up the reviews and paste them in a book, and I don't know why. But it was something I wanted to keep track of with no idea of where it would end up. And if I didn't read German, they fortunately had stars. So the 4-star records were circled. Anyway, I'm sitting across from Carnegie Hall and I'm wondering if I can produce a record for $2.50. I know where the music is for Baroque music. It's in overseas companies. And I can go over there and get that material because they're not released in the United States, which is what I did. My idea was I wanted to do 3 genres that were specialty that would not fit into what Elektra was doing, because by that time, we were beginning with the Paul Butterfield Blues Band and we're beginning to go in a different direction. And I did. I knew exactly the labels to visit because I had all of this material in a book. And I got on a plane and did it and made arrangements for about 150 records immediately, left checks for $10,000 all over the place as an advance, $500 per album, then put out the first 10 records. It was my feeling that to be substantial, people needed to see an equal flow of records coming from this label. And I made it a cognate of the book because in that time frame, the mid 60s, books were a quality paperback. A quality paperback, if you'll remember, was $2.50. So what I did was tie the records to the books. quality records at the price of a quality paperback. It immediately told the story. It was so simple, but you had to take the first steps. I knew that first steps would lead to other steps. And then people began to bring in their recordings of world music. And by the time we stopped doing that, there were 92 albums out. And I was very interested in electronic music. And we did things like a 2-record set, which was the guide to electronic music at that time. It explained all the fundamentals. We just did, everybody thought that we were kind of crazy, but after a while, I got offers of, can we buy your None Such label? We'll give you $500,000. I don't want $500,000. I want None Such. Everything was custom. And we had beautiful covers and great notes. And it was a $5 record, but everybody jumped in and tried to catch up to us. But we had 100 records out by the time the first Vanguard records came out. So that was magical. And we just made it up as we went along.
So you have always clearly been really interested in the technological side of everything that we're working on. And so you were interested, obviously, I mean, you got involved with the company that started the compact disc, that created the compact disc. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. The compact disc was the invention of the people at Philips in Europe and Sony in Japan. And they wanted to come out with records that were compact discs, but they didn't have enough catalog. And Philips said, I'm going to call Jac Holzman because he did me a big favor once. I'll explain the favor later. And they called and they told me what it was. And I said to call Steve Ross, who was the chairman of the overall company, Warner Communications, and said, this is what's happening. I think it's important. I'm going to go to meet them in Germany, and I want a power to make a deal if I think a deal is going to be worthwhile for us. So he said, how much money are you going to spend? I said, I don't know, but figure $1 million to get it started. He didn't blink. Or at least he didn't blink so I could see it over the phone. I mean, he was very, very quick with his answer because he had trusted me on so many things before that happened to materialize. And he was in the future about to trust me with something else that was a surprise to us all, which we can get into later. But the reason we got this was that when I'm trying to think of the name of the disc. When the first movie discs arrived, they were done by Polygram, and it didn't really succeed over time because it was somewhat difficult to work with. But I went over there and they explained to me what this was, and they told me what the specifications were. And they said, it's 44K and it's a 16-bit word. And I said immediately, are we locked into a 16-bit word? And they said, yes. And they said, why? I said, because 20 bits will make all of the difference in the resolution, especially of the low end. I couldn't talk them into it, but they invited us in and they were going to build the pressing plants, which they did. And we had access to those and we had a guaranteed 30% of their output and stuff like that. In time, we built our own pressing plants. But because of what we had cooperated with on movie development for their digital LPs, in effect, we were in at the very, very beginning. And that is when the CD was birthed, and I knew it was going to work because it had some of the features of the LP. You could put pamphlets in it, you could write notes in the packaging. What we were going to do elaborate packaging because I thought that would work best, give people the most information and invite them into the experience. And the fact that you could later, and it was inevitable, you'd be able to play it in your car eventually. So that was a big, big development and immensely successful in the music business. And it brought us to our peak year in 2000 when we did about the industry did about $18 billion. So that was fun to bring that. And I had a lot to do with the pressing plans, and I negotiated the contract and we initialed it. And, but the thing I regret is that I should have held, they were going to release records with 16-bit words. I thought 20-bit made much more sense. I think I was right, and but it happened.
So interestingly, that was 2000, the year we as an industry really peaked. And now
Yes.
we're 20 years later, and it's been almost a complete revolution we now sell music almost entirely as streams, not even really as downloads anymore. And yet, as you said, there's a healthy market for beautifully packaged LPs and even CDs. People still love that. They still love to have something to hang on to, I think.
Yeah, they have their virtues, and the beauty of these discs is that they are decoded optically, so you have nothing scratching across the surface of it, and that's a big plus. I've had more fun doing this over the years. Uh, the fellow who was head of film transfers to tape at Warner Brothers Pictures held up a tape and he held up a CD and said, "Why can't we put a movie on the CD?" And we made it happen.
Absolutely.
And we set together a team, and we were the first people out there. It was Sony, Polygram. He asked a very simple question, but it got me thinking. And I knew who to talk to. I talked to Steve Ross. He said, "Do you believe it?" And I said, "Yeah, I believe in it. I think we should do it. We have a lot of technology. We can do it, and we can do it within a year." And we did. So all of that, I've been involved with most of the technologies except the development of the LP. But Peter Goldmark and I became fast friends, and he gave me one of the 3 copies still extant of the 1946 on February 2nd. The first 3 came out of a press. We didn't get them until the fall of 1946. Yeah, 1948. That's when they first came out.
So another label you started was called Cordless, and that label was sort of a digital precursor to these digital only labels of today. So you're visionary again in that situation. But how do you, what do you envision? I mean, we're now in this digital age. What do you envision is next in terms of, how we're going to be listening to music in 20 more years?
I think that we're probably close to the end because we have not that many different ways you listen to something or see something. So I think we're probably at the end of that. Better concentration, perhaps, if there's less memory, but I don't see much change. We're pretty much at that technology level that we need to be, that satisfies everything.
So we have both, and both options are you see those continuing into the future, the physical and the digital.
Yeah, I think so. there are things that in the notes you sent to me earlier, you mentioned virtual reality,
Yeah.
which there hasn't been any
Yeah.
because they haven't been able to come up with software for it that is meaningful. Game games are much more valuable in those milieus. So virtual reality can't sell devices to view the whatever the wonderful thing is because there's no software. But we have virtual reality every night when we look at our TVs. We're in a situation now where movie theaters are closed. I'm sitting at home with my 66-inch Samsung TV and with all the audio stuff, and I am thoroughly entranced. I don't need anything else. I don't intend to go to a movie theater probably ever again because there's nothing there that's that different. And I'm not having to sit next to somebody who is deciding to munch on something. It's you're in your own protected environment, and I think these circumstances are going to be very effective long term. We're not going to all rush out all of a sudden. We'll see most of our movies at home.
You know, Jack, I have to ask you, in my previous life, I was an anthropologist. So I have a lot of interest in culture. And it strikes me that someone like you, who is a successful visionary throughout his entire life, one of the reasons that is that you have your finger on the pulse of the culture. Like you actually understand what people in the culture want. And I think one good example of that is, one good example of a failed one of those in America is ringtones. Ringtones never took off here the way they took off in Japan. For whatever reason, that was something that made sense in that culture, not in ours.
Wait for me just a second. Ringtones work, and I'm going to show you why. Okay, ringtones pop up somewhere.
Glad I brought it up.
Well, I'll find them. Ringtones. I believed in sound effects, and I am still selling sound effects mostly through the Apple Store these years, and they bring in enough money to take a nice holiday per annum. I thought ringtones was kind of a lost cause, but that's because it wasn't approached properly. So I decided that maybe I can do a ringtones project. And I thought about it and I thought about it and I said, what is unique that would lend itself to ringtones? And fortunately, I have a son who is a composer as well as probably one of the top 5 keyboard artists we have these days. And he played with Miles Davis and ran Miles Davis's band for 4 years and went up from that. So I said to him, and he's a composer, I said to him, I'd like to try some ringtones, which means we have to create them and you're going to have to write the music for them if you want to do it. He said, yeah. He said, what do you want? And I said, I wanted to do something that was spatial, cosmic ringtones and sonic realms. This is the record. I guess everybody can see it. Can you see it? And this record was meant just to explain to people what it was. And if you send me your address, I'll send you a copy. And we made these ringtones and we put them up on Apple and Android. And we've been doing phenomenally with them. Some of these ringtones are all based, it's called These are based upon aspects of the universe that we decided to put to music. So we have uh, a meteor shower, a big bang, a zone of avoidance, a solar wind, a photon fury, and on. We have 29 of these things, or 25 of them actually, and then a syzygy, dark matter, galactic halo. And it it was slow at first, but then people tell people, and they hear these unusual sound effects, basically sounds on their ringtones. And we just did that about a year and a half ago, and I would be embarrassed to tell people how many we're selling of those. And yet this was strictly a promotional copy to explain to people what it was we were doing. So I've never given up being in music production. If I can come up with an interesting idea, fortunately, I've got a composer son who's phenomenal. So Adam Holzman is doing well.
Well, you mentioned holiday, so I thought I should move to that question that I wanted to ask you about taking a midlife retirement period.
I was a big moviegoer. I could live on 20. I had an income, a net income of about $200 a month. The rent where I was staying was $100 a month, and it left me $25 a week. Now, my big meal of the day was at a hamburger place, which for 99 cents, you got a full meal, hamburger, vegetables, potato. Dessert was 15 cents extra. Anyway, the rest of the money was spent on movies. That's where the sampler idea came from. You see a movie, they're marketing themselves. Why aren't we marketing ourselves that way? It's simple stuff, and everybody sees it, but nobody holds on to it. So I'm at the movies one day, and this movie is called Holiday with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. And it talks about a guy who's come from the other side of the tracks. I certainly didn't come from the other side. I put myself on the other side because nobody believed in what I was about to do. But he said that he wanted, if he ever had a score, he wanted to take a break at midlife and see what it was all about. And that stuck with me. So when Elektra was growing and growing, and Queen was my last big act, which was a wonderful signing. That was great fun. Me against Clive Davis, and it was a snap because they move slow and we move fast. It made sense. Take a break at midlife. And so I knew that, but I couldn't do it without putting the company in good hands. And I've been trying to convince Warner Brothers that we in Atlantic, they were joined by that time, should get together as a group of labels and start our own distribution, because independent distributors were marketing our records or selling our records, but they were not following our marketing ideas. So I said, we got to control our own message. And we did it. And within 3 months, we were right up there with Columbia, and we were the other major label group. And all of us had incredible records coming in. Atlantic, and Mo Austin was doing his job, and I was still doing mine. That's the end of that. Okay. I thought I had done this already. Tie this together so I don't lose it. Put it over this. Great. All right. That's taken care of. And I knew that if I did that, I could, at the end of my contract, which was 3 years, I could do what I wanted. In the meantime, I had discovered Hawaii. I had bought a small place there. I hired some people that I knew who were very creative to totally rebuild it. And I went there for 7 years. And I didn't listen to much music anymore. I was taking a vacation for everything and just trying to find out who I was and what I wanted to do again. And I had a wonderful time. I loved airplanes. I ended up with several of them in Hawaii. I would fly commercially. We ran a, a a Maui to Honolulu service. You know, I would be the captain on those flights. That was fun. Some people recognized the name and stuff, but it was just fun. It was a totally different life. And I had a ton of friends. I mean, a whole bunch of friends had done this before me. And I think that was one of the enticements to take me there. But at the end of 7 years, I was ready to come back. And I called Steve Ross and I said, I'm ready to come back. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, I really want to take on future technologies. So I'll be your chief technologist, which doesn't mean I have any authority, but it does mean I can say that and go out and explore all kinds of things. And Atari was one of the first things I investigated on behalf of the company. And
And
we
of
did buy
course,
that company. And
yeah,
it did great until they got stupid. And then, but I think one of the most interesting things I ever did was that we had a subdivision called Panavision. You would see Panavision on your movies. It was not only a widescreen thing, but it was camera equipment. They made cameras, they refurbished cameras, they built all kinds of things like a Steadicam that would, they stole the Steadicam idea. I later owned the Steadicam company, but uh, there were these opportunities for me to use a different part of my mind, and he let me do that. In 19 let me say, I got to get the years right. Uh, in the mid 70s, the we were having problems with Panavision. He asked me to find out what was happening there. They had taken down $5 million, and nobody knew why that was happening. And I went over and I met with the gentleman, uh, Peter Goldmark, who ran the company. And eventually he took me into, I got no answers. And eventually he took me into a room where all these cameras and devices were. And I noticed a small camera where a red light was flashing. And I asked him if that camera was passing film through it. He said, yes. What he had, all cameras previously had been blimped. You surrounded them with sound absorbent material so the camera noise would not be heard in the microphone. What they had done was make the camera silent. And so I called Steve Ross and said, they've got something really great. He said, well, they report to you from now on. And they did report to me. And then there was a tragic thing where Mr. Goldmarks was murdered, and there was panic. And Steve Ross called me and said, "This is what's happened. Will you find out whether it's true?" I said, "I'll call you back as soon as I know." I found out it was true. I called him back, and I said, "Yes, it's true." And he said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "I've already done it. I've taken over the company, and I'll be in there tomorrow morning to run it. And we'll continue doing what Gottschalk did. We'll be respectful of his contributions and his smarts, even though he was tough to get along with. And over time, I was able to win the people in the company over, and we had just exciting results over the years. And then they were so good that Ross decided to sell the company and got 45 times what he paid for it. So that's that story. That was great fun, though. How we managed the company was also interesting, but that's probably another interview.
Probably another one. Well, I want to ask you, I recently interviewed someone who we were talking to young people who are sort of starting out in their journey in the music industry. And this person advised that every young person should be the CEO of his or her own corporation, whether that corporation has anything going on or not, just for the experience of being the boss of something, even if it's nothing corporation or me corporation. And you've had such a long and varied career, and you've had so much experience with being confident and being an entrepreneur. Is that the type of advice you'd agree with, or what do you tell young people about that?
I would say that you must be responsible for every aspect of what you do, whether it's boss or not boss. Do everything that you think makes sense. Try not to paint yourself into a corner that you can't get out from. But try things, try different things. That's what we did. People say that's not what's done. But what's not done is where the answer lies, I hope. And they should hope. But they should take the risk of just running their own companies. It's no boss thing. It is that you are creatively responsible for thinking it through, figuring out how to get there, knowing how to work with people, and being lucky in your prayers. Any other questions?
Solve that one. I think talking to young people about how to have confidence, where confidence comes from, I think that's a big one these days, because I think there are a lot of people
it depends
who
upon
don't
how
feel that they're confident.
Yeah, it depends upon how they've been brought up. If their parents have told them to do everything, they've got to think about not listening to the parents. I mean, they'll tell you can't do it, but not listening to a bunch of people, and then picking the thing that you think works best, or creating the thing. If it doesn't exist, can you afford to create it? How do you make connections? What can you do that's unusual that calls attention to yourself that's reasonable? I've always said to myself, pretend you're right and go ahead.
Pretend you're right and go ahead. I like that.
That worked for me, but the stuff was thought out. And when I was doing the None Such thing and sitting in this deli across from Carnegie Hall, they had this butcher paper, and I'm figuring out whether I can make a record that sells for $2.50 and what the cost is and what the margins will be and how much can I pay in advances and where is it going to come from. And until I could block all of this out, I wasn't going to go forward. Once I thought it was possible, the key thing was, could I get the record? Could I get the overseas albums at my price? And I could. I mean, you don't take one album and give them $500. You take 10 and give them 5,000. That's how you make that kind of stuff happen. And I spent about a month trying to learn French and across the street at the language lab. But it's just trust yourself, think thoroughly, and don't get despaired easily.
Yeah, don't fall into despair. So, another thing that I talk to young people about a lot is that nobody's career is a straight line. There's always twists. There's always things that we weren't expecting that came along and threw a wrench in where we thought we were going. Can you talk about any of those sort of unexpected things that happened to you that altered your path along the way?
No, I can't. I'm trying to think of failures. No, I can't. Everything seemed pretty much to work. Some worked better than others, but all of them ended up being profitable. But the music thing was what I didn't think about it just as records. I thought about it as a total picture. what can I do that other people are not doing, that are tightly focused on the music? It's the music, it's the music. And you get stuff early to radio stations and the FM stations, because AM wasn't playing us at all. And then you end up going to a club one day and someone says you should stay for the group that's following, and they're called the Doors. And I sat and listened, and there was mostly blues, and they were okay. 3 nights, and I wasn't going to go a fourth night. And the fourth night I said, well, if it doesn't happen tonight, it's not going to happen. So I went, and they did the Alabama song. The Alabama song is from a Kurt Weill operetta as rock and roll. And it was glorious. The musicianship was always there. It's Jim just was where, if we could discipline or get focused Jim, not discipline him, that's impossible. But if we could focus him and the band, and they knew nothing about recording. They had made some demos, which I had heard. There was 1 or 2 songs on it I thought impressive. Then we should go. And we did. And I picked the right person on my staff to be the producer. I insisted that they rehearse for 2 weeks before. They went into the studios. We knew what the material was going to be. The album was recorded in a week. I knew that Jim loved the condenser microphone that Frank Sinatra used. And I got one of those in the studio for him, and he picked it up. He said, "This is my microphone?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "This is what Frank Sinatra uses." Those are the things, the little things you do can have enormous influence. And then when the album was made, they sequenced it and I resequenced it. I always held the right to resequence an album, but I'd give them a shot. And the rest is history. It happened instantly. Something I never expected. On June 19th, 1967, I was standing in my office in New York, and one of my radio marketing people came in and said, "You're #1 in Billboard." I cried.
That's amazing.
Never expected a #1 in my life. But there were a lot of #1s after that, going through the whole Queen and all of the others in between. The Judy Collins and just the marvelous roster of artists I had, because they wanted to work with us. And we went about signing artists very differently. I will tell the Queen story. I knew Columbia was involved, and the manager who had come to see me for another reason, not for me to know about Queen. He brought 10 boxes of audio tapes, and he said, "We would like you to manufacture and distribute these records in America," which meant that we would bear the cost of the manufacturing, we would bear all of the marketing costs, and we would get half the profits. I didn't tell him that at the time. I said, "Well, let's leave the material with me." And he did, and I could play it at home. These were master tapes, 10-inch master tapes. And I heard this group called Queen, and there were 3 terrific songs in it. And I said, "I can't do it for this reason, but Queen interests me." He said, "Oh, we're already talking to Columbia." I said, "Have you seen a contract from Columbia yet?" They said, "No, I haven't seen a contract." So I went over and met the group and spent a few days and sent 4 key people from my organization over to be with them. And they had made no decision. So I wrote the Elektra contract. The Elektra contract consisted of a page and a half, welcoming them to the label, telling them the number of years, telling them the royalty rates, what the advance would be. I figured $25,000 was a little more than I wanted to pay, but that might get it. And I put it in an envelope, and then I took it out of the envelope And I wrote a check for $25,000 and signed it. Now, they could have cashed it, but it was no record company would ever do that. But it made the difference. It showed that I trusted them. And we had the best relationship. I've led a very happy and successful life. The secret is, I don't know what the secret is. Just telling the truth to others is probably as good as you can get. And then telling the truth to yourself, which is even more important.
Well, Jac, thank you so much. It's been such a privilege to talk to you and hear
I've
your
had
story.
more fun than I've had in a week. So this has been
that's
great for me. And if anybody has a specific question, I'm open for questions for another 10 minutes. If you are, I don't know whether this is germane to your finished package or what.
We have a couple questions that folks have written.
Okay. Why don't
like
you
to hear
just ask me and I'll see what I can do with them.
Okay, so this is from Elizabeth Tallman. Since you are a master of sequencing albums, which is a lost art, what is your favorite sequenced album and what do you look for in this process that makes it special or unique?
I want to make the album better than the sum of its parts. When I have that feeling for it, I know it works. Sometimes it's a changing of Judy Collins, perfect example. She had come to the point where she said, I want to pick all my own material. I said, go ahead. And she made the album with Mark Abramson, who was an embryo producer, but very good. I think they were lovers. That's fine. And then they brought me in to play the record. And I listened to the record and I said, we don't have it. And they said, what do you mean? It's perfect. And I said, it's not perfect. And she said, what do you expect me to do? I said, I expect you to go out and find more songs. And then we'll go back into the studio and we'll record them and see if we can make it work. And she didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. Then I get a phone call. And she says, I had the two greatest songs. I just met the most wonderful songwriter. He speaks French and he lives in Canada. It was Leonard Cohen. And those two songs, when we recorded those and put them on the album ignited. We knew where they were going to go. And it saved the day. We've always kidded each other, she and I, because we're still very close. And I've helped sequence the albums when she's asked, she's done subsequently. But sequencing is critical, and getting the objectivity is to get them through the first side with excitement. The last song on the first side will encourage them go to the second side, and then you go through it again. Now, you didn't have to do that with CDs, but the sequencing with CDs was essentially pretty much the same. It's a talent I developed over time because I did it for most of the artists, and I was always very happy with the results. More importantly, the artists were happy with the results.
Well, everyone in the chat is saying thank you so much for all the great music. So I would like to join them in saying thank you for the great music and all of the, wonderful songs that we all got to live with and still get to live with. And thank you so much for this interview. It was such a delight.
It was fun for me. I think the questions were excellent. I thank everybody for participating and for supporting. I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Me too. Take care, Jac.
Bye all.
Bye.